Bienvenue tout le monde. Welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Deepening How We Evaluate and Understand Youth Success. Today's discussion is the first of a few webinars on how we understand youth success. And so we're really pleased to be joined here today with some partners in our Communities Building Youth Futures Network. We'll be joined by Maxime Crawford-Holland and Lindsay Cornell from CBYF Yukon and Trevor Johnson, CBYF Chilliwack. Before we get started, we have some technical considerations, and I'll pass you over to Liam.
Hi, so we have French translation available, and just to let you know, you can please choose your preferred language via the globe button on the bottom of the screen. We have English and French available. And for other technical considerations, we've got you covered. You'll see the full recording, the slides, as well as the collection has links and resources. You can use the Q&A button on your Zoom to submit and vote for questions you'd like us to discuss. And for technical support, you can use the chat panel to ask for technical support through the webinar. We'd also like to have gratitude acknowledgement. We begin this webinar by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. For those of us who are settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land. This recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of the truth and reconciliation real in our communities. And back to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Liam. Again, welcome everyone. My name is Natalie Blanchette, and I'm the Director for Communities Building Youth Futures at Tamarack Institute. And thank you for the land acknowledgement, Liam. I'm going to invite you all to, in the chat box, write where you are calling from, and I am calling from Mi'kma'ki, otherwise colonially known as Nova Scotia. So I invite folks to say their names and where they are calling from in the chat. So the overview of the conversation today. Well, first, we're going to start by giving you a very quick overview of Communities Building Youth Futures. And then we are going to have a conversation with our two panelists, Maxime and Trevor. We're trying to make this a real conversation, so we want to hear from you as well. So in order to hear from you, we have two ways. First, you can put your questions, your comments in the chat box or in the Q&As. But we have three questions that we wanted you to answer all throughout the presentation. So we will be adding, in a few minutes, we will be adding in the chat box the link to a mural where we invite you to, at your leisure, answer the questions related to the topic of conversation today. So thank you so much for sharing some of your insights, and whether it's in the chat box, the Q&As, or in the mural. So as I mentioned earlier, today we want to start the dialogue with people doing the work at the community level. And on June 15th, we are going to have our second webinar on this series, and it's going to be about systems change. So systems change to improve data collection and access regarding youth success. In October, our Communities Building Youth Future annual gathering is going to be in October 26th and 27th. And what we're going to do at our annual gathering is we're going to take what we're learning from our webinar today and our June webinar in order to share back with you what we've learned and some of our insights. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to start now sharing with you what Communities Building Youth Futures is. So we are a network of 20 communities across Canada. It's a whole of community initiative aimed at collaboratively engaging and supporting youth through high school graduation and beyond. The principles of Communities Building Youth Futures are: we put youth at the center of all the work that we do. We take an equity lens across our initiatives. We have a geographic diversity. We're in small to medium-sized communities that don't always necessarily have opportunities to receive similar supports and funding. We rely heavily on peer network and support. So our 20 communities in Canada, they collaborate and they connect several times a month and learn from each other. And data and learning is very important for us to help iterate the work of communities building youth futures. So on the next page, describing here in the circle our collective impact plan for achieving our outcomes for communities building youth futures. So CBYF is a collective impact initiative. We have youth at the center. It's a whole of community collaboration. We're creating academic opportunities and employment pathways. We have opportunities for innovation investments. We are looking at not only some initiatives, programs, projects, pilots, but we're looking at what system level changes are required in the community as well as nationally. And as I mentioned earlier, focus on data and learning to inform the work. So with this combination of components, that is how we are aiming to improve outcomes for youth, improve high school and secondary graduation rates, and increase the number of youth that are accepted to post-secondary. So that is our a little bit of an insight into our collective impact plan for achieving the outcomes for CBYF. If we move to the next slide, what I can share with you is that over the first year and a half of Communities Building Youth Futures, we had ongoing conversations with our communities about what are the barriers that are being addressed by communities? What are the barriers and challenges that youth in these communities are facing? And there were some very prominent themes that came up, and they are there for you to see. Accessible education, the navigation of services and access to supports for youth, employment and mentorship opportunities, identity, social connection, creating opportunities for youth engagement and leadership, and holistic health and well-being. So by focusing our efforts, targeting the efforts of each community based on their priorities and needs, and focusing on these priority areas, that's how we are improving outcomes for youth. So when we think about data and learning, I'm going to ask to go to the next slide. So we've talked a lot internally at Tamarack and with our community partners about the strength of collective impact, about data and learning. So with collective impact, we emphasize data and shared measurement so that we better understand the context of communities, we better understand the challenge and the priorities that each community is tackling. And we also, when we mention we're focusing on improving outcomes for youth, we ask ourselves that in addition to measuring some data points, some key data points, such as the number of young people graduating from high school in a community, we are asking ourselves the questions like, how do we gather additional data for a deeper understanding of youth success? So if you think back on the 6 priorities from the last slide, so some of them were very holistic and thought about youth as youth in a context of a community. So how do we gather additional data for a deeper understanding of youth success? And how do we measure and understand key community factors that are present and that impact youth success? So those are questions that we hold throughout our work. With our communities, we have those conversations, but today what we wanted to do is to start a conversation and to share that conversation with you around what's that broader piece. How do we more broadly understand our context? And so in the next slide, what we have is we've put together parts of the community context. So what is a community context for us to really help us understand that deeper youth success, those youth success indicators. So we have that social connection, health and well-being, school and community engagement, school climate, just the basic needs of youth, family support, mentorship, and sense of belonging. So those are those components of the community context that we had been talking about as a panel. And we're wondering if you could take a minute or 30 seconds to a minute to think about what are we missing in the community context based on the work that you do. So we ask that if you could put that in the chat box to give us a sense of how all of you are seeing community context and what has been important in your work to really understand the locatedness of youth, to understand their context, to understand their success. And so those are starting to come in now. So we have youth voice, rural community transportation, always such a big issue, child and youth participation. Also feel free to write these comments in English or in French. Mentorship, having youth build skills and be given opportunities to build those skills. Inclusion as well as connection. Near peer relationship. Youth voice, understanding of rights. Very good. Developmental relationships, these are excellent. Family dynamics. Youth participation for sure, and strengthening collaboration with schools and administrators. I see there are 27 new comments, so I'm going to ask folks to keep sharing with us. These are really, really good. So thank you very much. So now I don't want to take any more time from our panelists. I would like to pass it on to our colleague Trevor from Communities Building Youth Futures in Chilliwack. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, Trevor.
Thank you, Natalie. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. As Natalie was talking about, the context is super important. If we don't have a solid understanding of the community context, it's much harder for us to concentrate our resources and focus on key areas which, when leveraged, will have the most impact in our community. So in Chilliwack, we used Rodney Wambing's community needs assessment template. And essentially, as it says in the slide, we started off asking ourselves questions. Is it about our community? Is it geographic, organizational, or cultural? And we define the boundaries, location, and size. We described our community, what the culture is like. Is it rural or urban? What kind of climate? Climate was actually really important for us here in Chilliwack. I'll get into it a little bit later, but the rain actually plays a big part in a lack of activities for our youth. So just I'll throw that out there. What values, attitudes, and beliefs are most important? Kind of jobs? Are there any dominant religions? Community demographics, population, median age, percentage of population in various ethnic groups, education levels, etc. And then what makes our community unique? What makes Chilliwack unique? So we gathered that information, and we were very lucky because Chilliwack has a very strong research community. So there was a lot of information already available to us, and we gathered that information and we started working on our plan on a page. Now, the work that we did on our plan on a page and using this information was sort of guided by two research questions, I guess, to keep our work focused. Essentially, what social problems are most impacting Chilliwack youth, education, employment outcomes, and what subsets of our population are experiencing those problems. So we brought all the information to the leadership table, and we discussed it at the leadership table, and then everyone at the leadership table was assigned some homework where they had to, I believe it was, connect with 4 youth and get feedback. So we all reached out to 4 youth, we gathered the answers, we met at the leadership table again, and using the info from the needs assessment, we started working on our plan on a page and identifying those critical areas, or the critical areas where we believe change will impact education and employment, and overall well-being for our local youth the most. Okay, see the next slide, please. Oh, maybe the next slide. I think I just skipped ahead. And there's our plan on the page. And that was the outcome of the needs assessment and the engagement with youth and the stakeholders in the community. Arguably, the most important part of the plan on the page are 5 critical shifts: the community connection, systems navigation, inclusive focused youth programming, substance abuse and addiction, as well as the physiological and psychological needs. But we also included some indicators, some of the more traditional indicators, such as grad rates, attendance, credit accumulation, and some of the more non-traditional indicators or non-economic indicators, however you want to describe them. Future orientation, are they going to post-secondary, trades, etc., community connections, perception of support, etc. So some of these have evolved, but essentially we're still looking at or for the same data. So as time has moved on, our plan has changed a little, and we will be updating this plan on the page to reflect where we are at. We'll be doing that in the fall. And that change is in part due to the conversations and feedback we've had with youth in the community. Can I see the next slide, please? So the feedback is part of the developmental evaluation, or an idea that what we're trying to do is collect data on the ground, actionable data that can be used in a timely manner. So that feedback has actually helped numerous times. I've included 2 examples, and I'll describe them a little bit. Just be mindful of time here. So could I see the next slide, please? All right, so here's the examples of again, super simple feedback tools that we created. One for the outreach engagement. So last summer, we did some outreach. We went out and engaged with the youth at the local parks, at the skate parks, the pump tracks, etc. And we asked them a few questions. Favorite pop flavor, favorite chip flavor. It's not a really big deal, but it's a great way to go up and then start a conversation and engage with these youth. But the favorite thing about Chilliwack, the least favorite thing about Chilliwack, and what do you want to be when you grow up? They're actually really helpful. We really got to see a bit of a picture of the youth's interests by asking what their favorite thing in Chilliwack, and that really helped guide some of our future events, as well as what do you want to be when you grow up. That was great, because what we found was over 50% of the youth we engaged in were interested in trades and apprenticeships, which has really helped us leverage some resources in the community and continues to help us do so. They also help, like I was saying, this outreach engagement survey also helped us come up with future plans, such as we hold a summer event. We are having a pop-up indoor skate park / drop-in center for youth, and like I said, employment resources. So as I was saying, we have this pop-up drop-in skate park / drop-in. We call it the after-school hangout. And of course, we had our first run March 15th. And of course, we had the feedback form. And again, the feedback form, it really helped. So our second one was April 19th. And based on the feedback, the majority of the feedback was really great, but we went out of our way to get a bunch of loaner skateboards and et cetera. The idea was to try to get youth who don't skateboard on the skateboards and starting to hang out and feel a little bit more confidence. And that didn't happen on the first one, but based on the feedback, we were told essentially that the youth who weren't skateboarding, they were anxious and they were a little, I guess, timid, afraid, embarrassed to go in amongst all the great skateboarders. So anyways, what we did, because we do partner with a recreation program, and what we did is we sandwiched a beginner section. We created a beginner section and we sandwiched it between the skateboarding section and the rec program. And what we found was by the end of the event, all of the youth from the one side of the building who had sort of stayed there at the initial event, they were all on the skateboards and they were all having a great time and starting to hang out with different youth. It was a whole other environment. And again, that was based on that feedback, right? It was actionable and it was timely. It was helpful. We could put it to use right away. So, so to talk a little bit about what we're looking at and some of the information we're going to be looking at for our larger evaluation. Maybe if we could look at the next, thank you. So something we're looking at currently is using resumes as an evaluation tool and as a resource to help guide our work on a more individual level. So why resumes? Well, they can be used, and I'm just going to read off the slide here. Can be used to measure progress towards higher level of employability. It's a written record of individuals' education, employment-related knowledge, skills, and experience, indicators of employability. And this is really important because really, I recognize that we're looking at education and employment, but for this specific, what we're looking at here, the employment aspect, the indicators of employability. So there's actually quite a bit of research or information that I've been finding on the internet on indicators of employability, which is really helping this process. Anyways, so also another reason why we're choosing to focus on resumes is because they're a fundamental part of the employment process. And what that means is, if you just look really simply put, getting a job includes writing a resume, handing out the resume, a job interview, and employment. So we decided to focus on one of those areas, the resume. And as we all know, what gets measured gets done. So hopefully by us measuring the resumes and how good the resumes are of our participants, hopefully we help our participants create better resumes, and which I firmly believe we have been doing ever since we've started focusing on measuring the resumes. We've been putting a lot more focus on ensuring our participants' resumes look really good. And so what to measure, what to look at the resumes? Well, like we said, we're looking for an increase in transferable and technical skills. So the soft skills, so those non-technical skills not reliant on abstract reasoning. Those are skills involving interpersonal and interpersonal abilities. And then, of course, experience, hands-on. We're trying to provide as much hands-on experience to our participants as possible. And that goes by including the youth in all aspects of our programming and of our events. We really are giving them that hands-on experience that they can put on the resume. So with the technical skills, the important thing with the technical skills that we in Chilliwack are focusing on are those technical skills relevant to the youth. So for example, one of our youth has identified wanting to be a youth rec worker when eventually, and they're in university. So what we were doing is we, after having chatted with them, we took a look at some of the youth rec worker job descriptions, and we have incorporated experiences, knowledge, and skills into what she is doing at the moment for CBYF, so that when the job position comes up, her resume will mimic that job that she likes, and hopefully that will lead her into getting that job, and we can say we did our job and she has a job. So, and of course, just looking at the number of resumes that we help and update. And part of the reason why I've included that is because at our after school event, we we do have a math tutor, and we've just recently got ourselves 2 individuals willing who work with youth and resumes in the community and are willing to come to our event to help youth with resumes there. So that's why we will be looking a little bit at that and measuring that. Okay, look at the next slide, please. And again, you know, just some indicators of interest moving forward. I thought I would include this as I was looking into employability indicators. There was some really great information on using economic indicators and non-economic indicators. In particular, with the non-economic indicators, really interested in finding out a little bit more about how the job resilience and self-efficacy impact or help you find meaningful and sustainable employment. So I believe that this is sort of the end of anything I put down on the slides. It's still a work in progress, as we said, this looking at resumes and this finding indicators of success that aren't the traditional ones is something that we continue to work on, and hopefully some of you folks can help us with this, with the information you provide in the chat. So thank you, Natalie, and thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Trevor, there's a couple of questions there for you. One of them was around the name of the individual that created the framework, but I see that Jamie has responded to that. The second question we have for you is, were youth at your leadership table?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, youth. We have our regular folk at the leadership table, but especially as we've started finding projects that the youth have asked us to start, we're finding it's more youth at the leadership table almost than service providers at this point. At least more youth show up.
Thank you. And the second question is, you talk about a skate park, but if you're in a smaller community where there's no park or no skate park or even malls, what do you suggest for ideas to reach youth in a small community?
That's a great question. I mean, for us, we actually found for our this indoor skate park, what it is what we said, we had to do a pop-up theme. So we actually rent a space for about 6 hours, and people bring their so we actually work with Skate Life, and they have a lot of really easy skate obstacles. I'm not a skater, so I'm struggling with the terminology here. But they bring it. They rent a U-Haul, a covered U-Haul trailer, and they show up. And because the youth, again, youth are so involved, it's not hard to find the volunteers and the youth to get in there. We unload it and basically set up. But really, it's all just about talking. Again, the engagement piece comes from talking with the youth. That came from, we just went out and hung out. We found a spot where youth hang out. And then we offered them food and some activities. We're doing the same thing this summer. So we're finding spots where the youth hang out. We're bringing a barbecue, and we're barbecuing hot dogs and handing out pop. And then we have our feedback surveys. So that's where I would start, is engaging with the youth, asking them what it is that they want, what their favorite thing about the town, what they wish they could see in the town. And then also, you know, bringing that information to the adult stakeholders also, and just getting those conversations started. Like, we need space. Like, we've been looking for space and hitting up individuals for space for the longest time. We finally got one space, which wasn't ideal. And then just recently we found this perfect spot, right and centrally located, that one of our main individuals at the leadership table just happened to forget until that moment. So yeah, I hope that helps answer the question.
Thank you, Trevor. And you've got 30 seconds left. I'm going to look. There are 2 other questions, but maybe you can answer one in the chat when it's Maxime's turn. But here's one about your resumes. Did you get a baseline of youth resumes in order to compare their resumes at the conclusion of the program?
Yes, I did.
How did you do that?
I asked them. And they emailed them to me. I'm still getting some. Sometimes you have to ask more than once. And sometimes youth don't have resumes, which isn't a bad thing either, because then we just offer to help them build their resume.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trevor. Now I'm going to ask Maxime to jump in at the next slide. And Maxime is with CBYF Yukon. Oh, and Lindsay from CBYF Yukon is joining us too. There's Lindsay. Hello to you both.
Hi, thanks so much for having us here. I'll let Lindsay say a quick hello as well before we move forward.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having us all here. And also for your patience. I am on the road, as most of you do. You make it happen where you can. And just we recognize up here, we're joining you from our Quanlandun First Nation and Tongwetchin, where Maxime's sitting. And where I'm sitting today, I'm joining from the Champagne-Ajiac First Nation. So we respect those. And I'll join with a few more words after Maxime finishes.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I just want to point out, Trevor, thanks for your stuff there. That was really interesting. Seeing your plan on a page and how nature-based it was, it really resonated with our approach of like connection to self and to land and to community. But we'll dive deeper in that in a bit. So yeah, as Lindsay mentioned, I'm on Quanlandun and Tahan lands today. That's also known as Whitehorse. And I think it's really cool. I was seeing in the chat, we have people here all over Canada, around the States as well. And I think I saw South Africa there too. That's super cool. So some of you probably have never heard of the Yukon. So I'll just give a little bit of context, and community context is super important. And that's kind of what we're going to try to emphasize here. So in the Yukon, there's about 40,000 people in total. So there's not a lot of people up here. And there's 35,000 people are in Whitehorse. So that's kind of the main city. And then there's about 12 to 15 small communities throughout the territory. So services are very centralized in Whitehorse. And one of our big roles is to try to expand services and build capacity in all of the communities as well. So just diving in a little bit, basically our approach to evaluation into youth success is all about sense of belonging. So if Yukon youth are feeling a sense of belonging, that is our ultimate goal, and everything else kind of fits under sense of belonging for us. So it's important to try to map out a little bit the community environment that young people are growing up in. To do that for us, we used a lot of different sources. Some foundational sources, like there's a number of publicly available documents that were like multi-year evaluations and projects, mostly through governments, so through our education system and our child and family services, and other systems as well. And then on top of those more formal research documents, we were building a more nuanced understanding of young people's reality by getting it straight from them. And so one of our principles, I guess, is like, we're looking at the whole environment that young people are growing up in. So if we can positively change that community environment, then young people will succeed in many other things as a result. So for example, high school graduation rates is a very common metric, and it's an important part of the story. But what's missing from that picture is maybe things like what's happening at home for the students. Do they feel safe at home? Do they feel safe at school? Are they even going to school? Are they taking care of younger siblings? Do they have access to food and housing? On and on. So all those things contribute to setting students up for success. And I also want to add, we see CBYF and our collective's work as restoration of connection to land, connection to self and to each other, through reconciliation, rather than creating something that doesn't exist. We're trying to restore it. So when we're measuring youth success, in addition to those traditional metrics, like we mentioned, we're wanting to look at those other factors like mental health, access to basic resources. Do they have strong role models? A positive social community is really important. And so the biggest way to get that data is to ask them. And that can take, the form of surveys or interviews or focus groups. And then more informally too, everyday interactions with young people is a really important part of evaluation too, just getting to know them and their experiences. So we kind of came up with this watershed concept. And Lindsay, do you want to introduce it, or do you want me to take a stab at it and then you can...
You go for it, Maxime, you're crushing it.
Okay, so basically the watershed is, it's a response to the reality of all these intersecting things that affect the environment that young people grow up in. So basically a watershed, we're using the watershed visual. So maybe we can skip to the sketch and hopefully we'll be able to zoom in on it a little bit. This is obviously a work in progress, but we wanted to come up with some kind of visual for all of you folks to be able to visualize what we're talking about. And if you have any ideas or additions, we'd love to hear them. But basically the concept here, you see there's a triangle in the middle of the page there. That's the shape of the Yukon. And then there's all these water sources flowing in from the top. So basically, I'll kind of explain first. It's a very, like a multi-year approach. It's very long-term, and the health of the watershed represents the health of the young people or the health of the community that they're growing up in. So you have these various inputs coming in from the top, and they all come together to create the environment that young people grow up in. And that's what we're calling the collective impact zone, is that place where everything comes together to create the environment. And so all of these inputs, like the water streams flowing in from the top, you can measure how many streams there are, and the quality of each stream. And so those inputs can be stuff like youth voices and food security and housing security, and the number of positive relationships that young people have, various programming, and then also more traditional sources like graduation rates and unemployment rates. Those are all inputs that are feeding into this. And then the outputs or the outcomes are basically, they're the things that are supported by the inputs. So for our analogy of the watershed here, we're talking about like things like, positive relationships or mentors in young people's lives that can be represented by old growth trees and the number of old growth trees. Or we have like new buds is like the number of youth engaged or the number of plants growing. I'm going to skip over all the little analogies here just for the sake of time, because you can really go down a spiral of trying to have an analogy for every little outcome. But I hope that kind of paints the picture of our concept here. And basically, yeah, there's various tools you can use. But yeah, I'll just jump to my coworker, Lindsay, to see if she has anything to add here.
Maxine, I think you did a wonderful job. A couple things just wanted to add in support. The process of creating this evaluation has been also a collective process. So we have an evaluation committee. And I do apologize, I am on the side of the road, so there is a bit of a traffic piece happening here. We like to keep it real in the Yukon. And we are looking at really engaging evaluation tools that can tell the story, but also provide a quantitative context. So that quantitative piece is really huge. And we wanted to create something that had some legs to it, that was robust enough that it could actually stand up in terms of sort of peer review and putting it into larger audiences. And I guess our third intent was to be able to potentially model a different way of doing, one that can achieve the goals and outcomes that we traditionally need, but can really represent our people. and how our young people see this world. One of the issues that we were running up against is no matter how many different ways we do it, one of our major outcomes from our youth voice has been that our problems are interconnected. And if we keep trying to solve one before the other, an example for us up here is a beautiful initiative from the federal government in terms of a strategic employment strategy. However, up here, we were all getting money to employ young people, but they didn't have housing, they didn't have food. And for us, in terms of a community context, we also have a major issue of transportation. Full disclosure, it was last month that they finally approved a Sunday bus system. So on Sundays, you couldn't get anywhere up here. You know, we do live a little old school in the north, many fires. And I think the other piece I wanted to mention too is through engaging our young people as we gathered this information, we really capitalized on our partnership table. We have a very large one that extends across the territory. It involves all of our chiefs, our grand chief. It involves all of our municipal and our territorial governments and our federal government as well up here that helped regulate a lot. And it was really impressive because they were able to host spaces on our behalf and have our team and our young people and our interns come into each of those spaces and meet on their turf, their land. So similar to what our friends in Chilliwack are speaking about, you know, bringing the skate park somewhere, creating that safe space was really important. Up here, we do not have any of those resources. Got to say, Chilliwack, shout out to you. That sounds amazing. Looking forward to it. Business opportunities in the north. But we used fire. We kept it really simple. We held gatherings with food, we had fire, and we just kept it really on the land and really informal. And when you do that, we found that from our young people, it was really powerful. And I also just wanted to come back to the evaluation tool and understand that the sketch is presented with a lot of humility and a lot of care, and really in the interest of transparency and in our process. I think that was one of the things we also wanted to share. It's not always so clean cut, not always a consultant. Sometimes it's still a chicken scratch envelope as you drive home one day thinking, oh, okay, this could be it. And just feedback of the people, I think, is really important there too. And shamelessly, as Maxime said, we really wanted to present it now early in the stages because there's, as we identified earlier, over 100 people on this call from all around the world. So any insights again, or any conversations that want to happen past this point, we're totally there for. And I think you can see that when you look at what the inputs are, so those are our metrics, our measures that we're looking at, and they're varying and changing. So it's also the quantity of the water that's coming in. But you can see that in the community, it matches really closely with Tamarack's previous slide around what are the community contexts and making sure that we're feeding all of those equally so that sense of belonging can exist. And that it is also a system that's based in change. So up here, we also found that there was a lot of folks that we try and box things up. We try and control. Our government systems are very entrenched in management of pieces, where again, that interconnectingness along with evolution. So up here and on the coast of Canada, we share a teaching from a lot of our Indigenous community around that concept of 7 generations. So as nature evolves, the community will evolve. There will be ebb and flows in certain places, but each of the community contexts that we're measuring, so for instance, the old growth is also being measured from the health of each of the trees. So is it an old growth forest that is healthy, that is growing strong, that is supporting other life? You'll see a nurse log in there. Or are we dealing with old growth that is maybe it's been logged, or it's not healthy? It's, that kind of piece. So we can also look at it from that landscape too. I think I'm going to pause right now, pass it back to Maxime. In the interest of time, I can go on forever. So over to you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yes, I agree. In the interest of time, we should keep things moving here because we want to hear from all of our participants here. And please, I'm seeing some nice things in the chat. Keep it coming so we can have more of a discussion in a minute. I'll just skim through quickly the rest of our thing. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So this is our plan on a page, not as detailed as Chilliwack's, but it kind of has our overall vision. You can see making sure young people are engaged, included, respected, and leading, mentally strong, safe to be themselves. Yeah, we'll keep it rolling. Next slide, please. I'm not sure. Is that just my slide or?
It looks like it's stuck between the two. There we go.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Liam. So yeah, basically youth knowledge and expertise and alternative ways of collecting data. I'll just touch on a couple examples that we use. So Youth Pathways to Leadership is our Community Innovation Fund project that was funded by Tamarack. And basically that's all about building capacity in the rural communities here and amongst young people to be the leaders and inspire others, telling their story of their community, telling us what they need. And we have a lot of youth focused questions that young people created with us as part of that project. So what does taking care of your community mean for you? What would make your community a helpful place for young people to live, work, succeed? And then maybe what barriers are you experiencing in participating in leadership opportunities? A whole bunch of questions like that that really focus on the young people as the experts of their own communities and on what they need. We had a big youth summit last week. We had the Yukon Youth Summit and it was pretty huge. We had a lot of our leaders there, our premier was there, a lot of our chiefs were there and ministers, and we heard from our young people and collected tons of input that is going to really inform our priorities going forward. And then, as Lindsay mentioned, we do a lot of sharing of evaluation with our partners. So the partners within our collective initiative, they have evaluation systems and we share them with each other. And like Lindsay mentioned, transparency and communication with each other is really important to getting as holistic of an understanding as we can about our community. So maybe I'll leave it there because I know we're past Q2. Lindsay, maybe over to you for a final word.
No, I just again want to say thank you so much to everyone for being here. Merci beaucoup. And I saw in the chat a quick question. We work with all of our Indigenous youth in the Yukon. There's one section that is Inuit in the very far north. However, we do partner closely with the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, but we are working first in the Yukon and then looking to expand so that we are working towards a territorial youth strategy that could look to be a northern youth strategy and inform our federal government and all places. And it was interesting in our summit, one of the calls to action in our country or in our territory was a request from our young people to actually adjust the voting age, again, coming up at 16 here. So that was another piece and that political intersect came up quite a bit for us. I don't know how I got there, but that was my tangent. And I think from that, before we go too far down the road, I saw another one. Yes, we have educational stakeholders. We partner with the Department of Education with the Yukon Territory. We work with independent schools. And for folks who aren't familiar with the Yukon, we have recently, as a territory, there has been a recent collaboration between a nonprofit organization that is our Yukon First Nation Education Department, and it is starting to work / take over our education system and guide the foundation and the philosophies with which education goes. It does not eliminate our territorial education system. It will be a collaboration, but it will be led by the Yukon First Nations Education. So I just wanted to answer those two that I saw, and I think there's more blipping in, but we'll pass it back.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Maxime. It's amazing to see. And before we go on to the next slide, I just want to thank Trevor and Maxime and Lindsay for sharing what is happening at the community level for evaluation and understanding youth success. And as I mentioned early, communities building youth futures, it depends on this network of sharing, not only across the communities, but also with Tamarack Institute. And this work has only been started in 2019. And so this partnership that Tamarack Institute and the federal government through ESDC has started in 2019, receiving that funding to then pass that funding along to communities for their work, their core and backbone work, as well as the Community Innovation Fund project that Maxime mentioned. It's really amazing to start seeing some of this, the results and the impact, and how the information is being measured, and how the information is being gained, and the input received from youth is incredible after only 2 years and a few months more. So yeah, I love that multi-layered, like the partnerships up and down and sideways and 3-dimensional. So thank you for sharing that. I do have a few questions that we had prepared for our speakers. So if we go on to the next slide. So this has come up in the chat already, but I wanted to ask, like, how have you been engaging youth and your stakeholders in developing your approach to understanding your community and understanding and developing your evaluation? And I'm going to go to Trevor first.
Thanks, Natalie. And I just want to say, Maxime, that was a great presentation. I love the watershed concept. So great. So how have we engaged youth and stakeholders? I'd say the biggest thing, we created teams, and we really focused on bringing youth into the teams. So for instance, we have a social media team made up of 5 youth. There's not even any adults on it. We've also got a social or a research team that's made up with 3 youths, and then a researcher from Fraser Health and a researcher from the university who helps guide them. Our outreach team, again, 3 youth. And of course, you know, like myself, I'm not a youth, obviously, and I'm there as well. But you know, the big part about engaging, big part about engaging youth is including them. And again, we've done that we provide youth honorariums for participating. So we're not expecting them to volunteer completely for free. And that has also really helped in our approach.
What about Maxime? Same question. How have you been engaging youth and stakeholders in this work?
I mean, our staff are youth. I'm a youth. Our coordinator, all of our interns are young people. So that's the backbone that's really driving the collective. You know, we make sure our action teams are co-chaired by young people and our committees. And then partners are always invited to join those committees and action teams as well. So there's a good relationship between partners and young people. And often our young people are the partners. Yeah, Lindsay, anything to add?
I think there's lots of different nuts and bolts to it. It really depends on your community context. But one of the things that we really focus on is that foundational understanding of sort of some of the guiding principles around how we see youth engagement and what's worked for us. Listening to I think one of them is showing up. That's the term we use, show up and consistently show up. So if a young person doesn't come, it's not a failure. It just means that you're back there that same time, same bat channel, for those that know that reference, the next week, and you keep showing up. The second piece that we really focus on is when a young person speaks or shares, we make sure that it is engaged meaningfully and timely. One of the things about youth engagement is making sure that any human engagement, it's not just about young people, it's about any human, is that they feel valued. And that means that we take action, and it's guided by their principles and protocol. So I think those 2 are really good. And then also, again, looking at the concept and really focusing on safe spaces, meeting young people where they're at, meeting humans where they're at, providing a bit of food and providing a space, or celebrating another space that has been working as a safe space for a really long time. So not creating a new door necessarily that they have to go through, but really embracing the fact that we need to go to them on their time in their spaces. And food. I always bring food.
I think food is a common denominator here. Our second question: what favorable conditions were present in your community so that you were able to make this work happen, and that really set the foundation and the conditions to make this work happen in the way that it did? We'll start with Maxime.
Sure. I think you know, all the work that's been happening pre CBYF, like we had a lot of partners already had this kind of informal collective. They were already envisioning a youth strategy, and Lindsay was a part of that. So maybe she can touch more on it, but just the number of partners that were already caring about this work, and, you know, various organizations take it in different directions. But the bottom line is that there were a lot of people invested in investing in our youth. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think Maxime hit it on the nose. The other piece that was favorable for us, I always say this work is a lot like comedy, timing and delivery. Having a choice and leadership to engage differently and speak truth was a big one to favorable conditions. People were really ready for that here. And what I mean by truth is just, you know, I remember the first few meetings, we had conversations where we quote unquote told each other that we need to take our egos out of this. Our organizational egos cannot exist. And also shout out to Tamarack for always putting up with me saying random crazy things, but and always supporting our crazy ideas. But just being able to be really honest about that and recognize that everybody does have an agenda at the table, even our young people do, and trying to honor that and make sure that we really complemented. We worked very hard to create a continuum of services, and we still do. And that has been really effective, again, from that timing place, and people were just ready.
Thank you. Trevor, what about you? Favorable conditions?
Well, I would say just like the Yukon, a lot of the favorable conditions was the work that was done before CBYF. For instance, in Chilliwack, there's a lot of local research. There's a ton of research done locally, and we have an amazing history of working together. We have numerous youth groups. We have YAC, we have the Child and Youth Committee, we have Chilliwack Youth Health Center. We have all these different committees who already exist and have a history of working together. So we really came in, we used the information that was already there, and we leveraged the resources that were there.
Okay, and there's 2 minutes left. I see, and we did want to let you know about a couple of things coming up. So want to thank you, the panelists, again for sharing with us. Also for the way you shared with us. Really, I felt, I don't know about participants, but I felt that like I could really get into the work and actually starting to visualize how it looked like in the development. So I want to really thank you for that. If you are interested in this conversation and would like to be part of our next webinar in this series, I'm going to ask Iliam to go to slide 22. We have on June 15th, we have a webinar called Systems Change to Improve Data Collection and Access. And so we're going to partner with a youth serving organization to bring that webinar to you. And then on October 26th, 27th, we have our annual gathering. And we haven't decided how that's going to look like in terms of bringing both of the learnings from those webinars to the conversation on October 26th and 27th. But what we'd like to do is really bring our learnings and develop, and maybe October 26th and 27th, we get even more people involved in the conversation. So at the end, after this webinar is over, we are going to send you the links to both of these events. And I'm also seeing that there's a participatory evaluation workshop being put on by Tamarack that we can send you the link to as well. So you'll be receiving those. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.